Thank you, everyone. So the topic today is degrees of equality, gender pay gap, and career advancement. The International Labour Organization estimates that women, on average, continue to be paid about 20% less than men across the world. In addition to remuneration disparity, fewer women than men are in management and leadership positions, especially at higher levels. And you must have seen the recent Global Gender Gap Index report 2022. Pakistan ranked the second worst. Pakistan was 145 out of 146 countries. And we were just actually ahead of Afghanistan, where there is a Taliban government. So please keep that in mind, and we are a democratic country. And Pakistan was 145 on the economic participation and opportunity. And we were 143 on health and survival, 135 on educational attainment, and 95 on political participation. So this is something that, you know, women across the world, of course, face the gender gap, the gender parity gap, but Pakistan in particular, what women face here, the challenges that we face here are very different from the rest of the world. In some ways we're ahead, in some ways we're really, really backward. So we're going to discuss that with our panelists today. Let me just introduce you to my esteemed panel. We have Ms. Asma Shah with us. She's a serial entrepreneur with 20 plus years experience of small businesses in Lahore and abroad, currently founder of Go Flower Bakery and Training Center, a social impact business providing free training in culinary skills for lower income women. And I must testify that the bread and the food is amazing because I tried it myself. Then we have Sirajuddin Aziz Saab, a banker by profession, poet, writer by passion, and foreign policy advocate by interest, with 4 decades of experience in spearheading banking operations, credit management and corporate banking, treasury management and correspondent banking and learning and development. And we have Mr. Sajjad Parmar with us. Sorry, it's Parmar, right? Yeah. And he's the CEO and founder of the Talent Accelerator, an HR tech firm based out of Singapore and Pakistan. So I'm just going to start the panel discussion and throw the questions at all of you, and then I'll start with Asma, of course, because it is about gender pay gap. So Asma, what do you think causes the gender pay gap? What are the reasons? Not just in Pakistan, but around the world also, or you can specifically talk about Pakistan.
Thank you, Mehmal. In my opinion, most businesses are led by men. And as a consequence, they tend to design the HR policies as well, which can make it more biased against women when it comes to employing them. And not just employing them, I think also passing them by for promotion. The mindset is that perhaps women will not be with them long term. They will eventually become a bad investment because they have to go off, get married, give birth, look after their family. So until that mindset changes, until we can accept that women have an equally important role as producing the next generation, there will always be this gap, and women will suffer from it. So we have to change the mindset, the way policymakers think, the way organizations think, and the way men think.
Sirajuddin sir, do you feel the same way? I mean, you have a vast experience. What do you think about this?
Allow me, Ms. Sarfraz, first and foremost to point out the fact that the gender gap in the audience kind of corroborates the theme of this particular panel discussion, that men do not consider it important to attend such proceedings. It's a reality of life. It's not deniable at all. That it persists in Pakistan is a little bit of a surprise for me personally. You could call me ignorant about the fact, but the institutions that I worked for, a conversation before we came here with Ms. Shah, I was telling her that it has never been an endeavor to distinguish between gender for a position in the institutions that I worked for. So it is more of a surprise to me that it persists, but as pointed out by him as well, that there is, I think, an inbuilt, a default mechanism for men in Pakistan particularly, although it's a global issue, but particularly for men in Pakistan, that they're better qualified, they're better entitled to a salary which is far more better in terms of both policies, compensation packets. I personally think that there are just not gender issues. I'll cite to you the mindset of employers in Pakistan so that you get a fair idea of where it all begins, where it all stems from. About 3 weeks back, in a very leading newspaper of Pakistan, there was this advertisement for an opportunity that existed with a large pharmaceutical firm, international firm, and it had in bold a font of maybe 15 or 16, which said equal opportunity employer. And at the end of the advertisement, in the fine print, it said, graduates from the following 2 universities only can apply. So that's the mindset that we all have. While we embrace the idea in its purity, let's begin with that, but when it comes to implementation, I think that's where we fall short. So I think the issue is a real one.
And Sajjad, you worked in Singapore. You work in Singapore as well. So, what is your experience in Singapore? But also, do you think that it's got to this gender pay gap is also because of male privilege? And what else is it, or just the society?
Allow me to share a few numbers with you. This is a study that came out about 4 years back. It's by a company called Partner. They interviewed about 40,000 employees across 20 countries. They also picked up about 500,000 data points from Google, LinkedIn, Glassdoor. And so this is the result of that study. So we know that there is a gap, right? But at the workplace, if a female perceives there is a pay gap between her and her counterpart, right? And the research is based on a male and a female doing the same job at the same grade. That perception alone leads that she might feel she can get 30% more salary if she leaves this job. That's number one.
Please speak into it.
Sorry. Second gap is she might be rated a high performer, right? But if she has the perception that she has a pay gap, she will feel like an ordinary employee. So that high performance assessment and even the result does not value. Third one, that feeling of pay perception gap is 50% worse than you getting a pay freeze. So assuming that we have hyperinflation and companies, recession is coming in, and a company decides to pay freeze, if you perceive you have a pay gap, you're going to feel much worse. 2.2% increase in turnover at the corporate level just because of the perception. If you perceive you have a pay gap, 50% plus decrease in manager quality. Your manager might be able to support you in other ways, but that perception does not land well. 16% decrease in intent to stay in an organization, just because you feel you have a pay gap. Then companies globally who have actually taken action on pay equity, and there are some companies who have done that, at the aggregate level, so men and women both, these companies go on and based on the financial performance, after the actions have been taken, the average employee performance and company performance is improved by 20%. Point number 2, 47% increase in the attraction rate for top talent. Just because these companies have taken action and they've publicly gone ahead and said, this is what we're going to do. And 24% less retention, right? I'm sharing these numbers because from my experience, from a corporate sector perspective, these will translate, not just in Pakistan, but globally we're looking at millions and in large companies, billions of dollars worth of money. Indirect impact on company profitability and performance. And to answer the question, and I think we were sharing with my members earlier, that there is a conscious bias and there is an unconscious bias. Conscious bias is, I have a female employee in my team, she's going to be a mother, she's going on maternity leave, oh my God, she's going to come back, and she's not going to be fully optimized, and what am I going to do? I'm thinking this is a conscious bias. Unconscious bias is the same thing, you're not thinking, but inherently, to what he said, that we feel it inside. she's going to come back, she's only going to work 9 months or 10 months, even though if she has done amazing when she comes back, right? Just after having a baby, I cannot rate her a high performer and I cannot promote her. Inherently, it's inside, it's inbuilt. And all of us have it, right? And that's the problem. And the conscious bias is a little bit easier to manage and tackle. It's the unconscious bias, right? From when we're young in a culture and society, and this is not just in Pakistan, but globally as well, across all major markets, we have this issue. It's very, very hard to tackle.
Thank you. Sorry, can you hear me? Okay. So the next question is, how do culture and societal practices affect career advancement of women? And let me just tell you from my own experience in the media. The thing is, you know, I've seen that except for English newspapers, there are no editors in Urdu newspapers, like except for one paper. And then, of course, there are also other problems that you face. So in the electronic media, you don't have director news who are women. You don't have director programming who are women. So this is, and actually in the media, there are not many women who are making editorial decisions. There are not many women who get high-paying jobs. They're either, you know, of course, a lot of women have joined the media and things have improved considerably since I first joined in 2005. It's been 17 years. Things have changed, and electronic media also changed the pay gap to an extent. But the thing is, how many women actually go to those positions, get to being an executive producer, or, you know, being the news director, director of programming, and other managerial and editorial positions. So, and also I think there's one thing else. So there's this boys club even in the media. जैसा रात के 10-11 बजे के बाद जो आदमी जब सारे बैठते हैं इकट्ठे और वो जिस तरह बातें करते हैं, तो ख़वातीन जो होती हैं चैनल्स के अंदर या अखबारों के अंदर, वो नहीं बैठ सकती. वो उस तरीके से ऑब्वियसली कैदा होता है, कैदा जैसे मैं बैठ जाती हूँ, सच्ची बात है, मैं जाकर बैठ भी जाऊँगी, मैं अपने मियाँ को साथ ले जाऊँगी हर जगह. किसी ने मुझे एक दफ़ा कहा भी, किसी सियासतदान ने, कि आप और आपका मियाँ क्या जॉइंट एट हिप हैं, हर वक्त साथ होते हैं. मैंने कहा आप लोगों की वजह से वो क्या अकेली नहीं मैं आ सकती. तो वही वाली चीज़ें फिर, यू नो, अ लॉट ऑफ जर्नलिस्ट ऑल्सो गेट द न्यूज़ फ्रॉम पॉलिटिशियंस, बिकॉज वो रात को इकट्ठे बैठ जाते हैं आफ्टर देव डन देयर शोज, देयर फ्री, जब होता है 10-11 बजे के बाद. दिस इज समथिंग हमारी कल्चरल और सोशल चीज़ है, ये प्रॉपर प्रॉब्लम है. सो आई फील मीडिया के अंदर तो डेफिनेटली है. मे बी यू कैन ऑल टॉक अबाउट योर ओन इंडस्ट्रीज, यू नो, हाउ दिस इम्पैक्ट्स यू एंड व्हाट आर द कल्चर एंड सोसाइटल प्रैक्टिसेस दैट अफेक्ट करियर एडवांसमेंट. आई डू फील कि जब वहाँ पर डिस्कशन हो रही होती है ना कि पोजिशन नहीं आ रही है, so they prefer their male friends then think about women who are actually, I've actually worked more with women even in the current. हम लोग ये चीज़ मैंने देखी है, हमारी ज़्यादा ख़वातीन है उधर, लड़कियाँ यंग, कि लड़कियाँ और ख़वातीन ज़्यादा मेहनत से काम करती हैं, because I think they want to prove themselves. So जितनी मेहनत वो करती हैं, ये नहीं मैं कह रही कि आदमी नहीं करते, लेकिन ख़वातीन मेरे ख्याल में ज़्यादा मेहनत करती हैं. So Asma, what do you think culture and societal practices कितना affect करती हैं career advancement?
I think बहुत ज़्यादा affect करती हैं. I run an organization which is majority women, and it's the hospitality industry basically. And so the women, some who have trained with us, they've left us and they've gone on to work in restaurants and bakeries and cafes, and they've come back after a short while, because it's like you say, your industry is also very male dominated, so is this one. The restaurant kitchen scene is not for women. There's a lot of, you'd be surprised, there's violence, there's a lot of bad language, and there's a lot of sexual harassment. If you're one woman or two women in a male dominated kitchen, you're not going to have an easy time. So it's pervasive. And I feel that by making a small change in the number of women you employ can make a vast difference to the way men see women. So I employ men. My women get paid equally well as the men, even in spite of the fact that they have less experience. But I want to show them that they can reach that level of experience by working hard, and they will be paid well. So all the women that come to me, if they need to go on maternity leave, that position is still open for them when they come back, and they do come back. so yes, it's the mindset that Sajjad was talking about that you need to change. Sorry, and that has to start right from the family unit. So when a child arrives, when she's born, you have to start thinking that she is an equal to your son. And a lot of mothers have to also accept that, not just fathers and the extended family. That the female can be equally competent professionally to provide for the family, in spite of having other duties. So, you know, it's how much you spend on their education, how much you spend on feeding them good food and nurturing them. A lot of women that come to me have absolutely zero self-confidence because they've been either consciously or subconsciously been given these subliminal messages that you are only good for marriage, you cannot achieve anything. And if I can give you an example, I had a trainee who came to me on a basic stipend, and she's a single mother of 3. So she not only has to fight her husband, her ex-husband in court, but she has to bring up these 3 children as well, single-handedly, with some support from her parents. And she is now the head of our hot kitchen, and she's on an amazing salary. And she is someone who had zero confidence, because I had a male chef at one point, and I wanted to replace him because he again was abusing his position in the kitchen. And she would decline the offer. And now that she is the head, she is doing so much better than him. And I'm paying her more than I would have paid him.
Sirajuddin Sahab, I've actually seen that, you know, there are workplaces that are not very women-friendly in the sense, I'm not talking about harassment or even pay gap, but like I know that some friends of mine left the media because there were no care rooms for their children. I mean, there was no daycare. So they actually switched to multinational companies because of daycare centers over there. So is this something that, you know, is also one of the problems that you feel that, which is why it affects the career of women advancement?
Indeed, I think it does affect the women workforce. The need for them to be away from their professions for a period of time for reasons other than professional reasons. I would like to remind the audience that it is the interviewing process from where this gap starts to develop actually. At the interview, for example, if I was to be interviewed by anybody, and as an interviewee, if I was asked about my wife more than once in the interview, I assure you I'll pull up my sleeves. While with the female candidate, men get away with murder in this country. They can ask any question relating to their husband, relating to their family, relating to what objectives do they have going ahead in the next few years. So I think that is where the whole process starts of discriminating women from the rest of the workforce. Obviously, I also have a cultural background of this country. I made a colossal mistake once, a few months back. I was interviewing at the Hong Kong University for fresh international management graduate trainees for an organization I worked then. And I asked this female student, I said, what does your father do? Oh God, the reaction I got from her, she said, why? Do you intend to employ him or me? Why do you want to know? I had to back off and I felt like, okay, the earth would open up and I'd get swallowed. So dismal performance as an interviewer. But that's where it all begins. That's how society affects you. Sorry. And I therefore believe that getting more people from the female gender into your human resources department is critically important. Because when they are there, they would be feeding the right information to the chief executive officer, who would then be obliged to take it up to the board of directors for formulation of policies which are friendly. I have worked in institutions that had daycare centers, not necessarily multinationals, they were Pakistani organizations as well. So it is not that things are not improving, they are. I belong to a very regulated industry. Banking is a very regulated industry. So consequently, our policies are more in alignment with what's happening globally. Even in the West, if you see, there has been a rapid improvement in the pay gap. If you just look at the US market itself, in 2015 and 16, it was 73 cents to the dollar being the pay for a male and 73 cents being the pay for a female. That's improved now by good 12 cents. And I believe the progress is pretty good out there. But the availability, Ms. Sarfraz, the availability of women workforce for assignments available across the industry, across sectors, is a major issue as well. So unless and until we produce female graduates for various disciplines, there will always be this gap that will persist. So we'll have to look at our demographics of education and invite the female gender to be participated in diverse fields so that they are able to absorb in the economic well-being of their own selves and the country itself. So it will have to be a very wholesome approach to removing these gaps.
Can I make an observation and a comment? So I think in Pakistan in general, I think we do have companies who do hire females. At least most of the companies I've seen, we do have females in HR predominantly. I think the challenge on not just pay gap, but career advancement, the systematic issue, to me personally starts with the leaders. I'll give you my own example. I've been fighting gender pay in my companies for the past 10, 12 years. The problem is at our level, when we go and we speak to country leaders and teams and business leaders, if the leader does not believe that this is a problem and they need to sort, there's nothing much any of us can do at the middle management level. Alternatively, if you think about cultural change or change management, if a company CEO says, I need to get this done, or I need you to do this, unless you don't like your job, you're not going to argue and you're not going to go against them. If you think about change management at the best way to do it, it has to start from the leadership. The CEO and the management team says, this is what we're going to do in 6 months' time, 9 months' time, and I need to get this done, it will get done. Or in most cases, it gets done. The problem is, on the top we say we believe and we support, and there's this professor in the US, and I can't remember her name, she's a leading voice on DE&I, and she's a beautiful thing, that all of this is useless if you don't put metrics and SLAs against that. I'm going to support gender pay. How are you going to measure it, right? What's the metric, what's the SLA that's going to tell you that yes, you have improved, to your point, 12 cents in the last whatever years, right? So if you want to make a change, and it doesn't matter who's doing what job, the leader and the leadership team has to commit, they have to put hard targets in, and they have to hold themselves and the leadership responsible. If we don't improve our leadership at the female leadership at the top level or gender pay gap, this is what we have to do, and then the system has to figure out how we're going to approach and how we're going to get there.
Well, the thing is that, there are a lot of industries, even if you look at our judicial system. After more than 70 years, we've had our first judge in the Supreme Court, female judge in the Supreme Court. So, there's this gender gap in every industry. Even in the media, when you're following the budget transmissions, do you remember if you've seen any female financial expert on your TV screens? Any of you? And it's not that there aren't any. We also had a female governor, State Bank. But it's because of this conscious bias and also unconscious bias that, people, because of our biases, we don't take women seriously. We don't take their analysis seriously, be it political or economic. Usually a lot of women were just given soft beats, like go cover a fashion shoot or a beauty parlor opening or something like that. So that's something that, that is a bias. Women can only do soft beats and they cannot cover terrorism or they cannot cover wars. So Moving forward, what can organizations do to close gender pay gap, Asma? Because you're running your own organization. So what, I mean, you've given very good examples, but what more can other organizations do?
I think they should definitely, like the policy that we have, where we have to have a minimum percentage of women working for us. At the moment it's 60, and obviously I want to increase that, but there are certain jobs that require a male to do. So that prevents employing women for certain jobs. But other companies can adopt the same kind of policy where they have this is the minimum amount of women. Just like abroad you have that, as well as for disabled people or transgender people, that you need to have these fixed percentages that every company should adhere to. Positive discrimination, it's called. So if policies like that need to be implemented, and if we see more women at the top in the decision-making positions, I think that's more likely to happen. I think, like you say, there's this boys' club that dominates the top management levels, the director levels. We need to get more women in to stop that mindset from developing and influencing policy.
Exactly, that's very important. And Sirajuddin sir?
I think most of us in our lives, we do not want to do any activity which is not measurable. And as you rightly pointed out, for example, in Pakistan, there is a regulation now in place for the corporate sector. Any company that's listed on the Pakistan Stock Exchange by an X date has to have a female director on the board. And that's already happening. But again, I go back to the availability of people. Like, for example, in the board that I was part and parcel of in Pakistan itself, I had great difficulty finding a female director because it requires a certain qualification, an examination that they must pass. So there are not many women available to fill in the available post. Even today, there is an opportunity there.
So, Sirajuddin sir, don't you think it's actually because they have not been given those opportunities in the sense, and that's why, as I said, we have just had our first female Supreme Court judge. It's not that, there are not many women lawyers. It's just that people don't look at them that way, and also they have not been given those opportunities. Like, affirmative action also needs to be taken. So don't you think even in the corporate sector or in the banking sector or even in workforce, affirmative action like in the parliament has been done. Women cannot win so many seats because they're not that politically active in their constituencies. So the reserve seat quota was made for them.
I don't think so, Ms. Sarfraz, that it has been denied in some manner, either by design or by default. The fact of the matter is that in the financial industry particularly, we price a job, and then it is regardless of the gender that we hire. If they meet the requirements, the same pay packet is offered, the same emoluments, the same comp packet is offered to, for example, a senior vice president. That could be a male or a female. We make no distinction there. So, sorry. So as far as the financial industry is concerned, I think the gaps there are far and few. But yes, I think in the private sector, which is non-financial, possibly it could be more domineering and more prominent and more pronounced. Again, to address that issue, I believe there has to be regulation. But regulations are not violated in Pakistan alone, they are violated globally as well. I'll give you a classic example of the last report that the Secretary of State of United Kingdom had to submit to the Parliament on the gender pay gap. He is required to review the legislation every 5 years. He failed to do that. And 250 large organizations incorporated in the United Kingdom failed to file the report itself. So there are violations taking place even when you have regulations, but I think it requires strict monitoring, strict implementation processes, and there has to be a punitive action. If there is no punitive action, then no regulation is valid. So I believe the two will have to go hand in glove. Thank you.
And Sajjad, in your experience, what can organizations do?
I think the first starting
Bridge the
point is
gap.
let's figure out what the gap is. Every organization is different. The representation of women to men in a manufacturing environment, obviously there are more men by default. In other services organizations, we see more women as well. So first, and I'm coming from an analytical perspective. So we have a gap, we know, but for your organization, what is the gap? And how does the gap exist? Does it exist by certain jobs? Does it exist at the lower level or the higher level? So we need to do some numbers and understand what the gap is. That's number one. 50% of the gap exists because of our hiring practices. So I'll give you a classic global practice on hiring. You hire a woman and you say you're getting 60,000 rupees a month. And you know obviously your scale, how much you have to pay. Most companies do, right? But you always link what you want to offer to what she's getting right now. Your average pay in the company might be 100,000 rupees, right? You've got 5 people doing the same job, and they're all getting average 100,000 rupees. She's getting 60. You will say, let's give her 80. She's going to get 30% jump, and that's good enough for her, right? Why do I need to pay her 100,000? Extrapolate that to most of the companies, and most of the hiring is done this way for females, and that gap will not end. Even if you do ad hoc increases, you say, oh, we're going to be gender pay neutral, and you do an analysis and you find out you need X million rupees to close the gap. You're going to do this year. Guess what? Next year, you're still going to have the gap again, because the fundamental gap, the systematic issue of closing the gap at hiring has not been done. If you do that at the hiring, it doesn't mean it's going to close the gap, but 50% of the problems, the companies who have done this, at least you're going to reduce that gap. And then to all what we're saying, that systematically, and unfortunately Pakistan, I don't have high hopes in terms of you can have regulations come in, right? Very advanced economies have done that, and to your point, there are still gaps, right? But I think the lead has to be taken at the corporate sector. And I'll throw a challenge to all of you, and I say this in many of the forums I have. Let a company decide that they're going to be the first gender pay neutral company in Pakistan and advertise it and actually do the work and publish the report. What do you think the outcome is going to be, right? I guarantee you from my 20 years in HR, they will have the best candidates applying for that company. The average female performance will improve dramatically, and ultimately the company performance is going to increase. But do we have companies who are going to take that action? Right?
No, that's a very important question, because a lot of companies actually don't, because they may have an unconscious bias in a lot of ways. And they also think that, even in the judiciary, I've talked to so many lawyers, and they say that we are actually fighting within the bars because we're asking them to change the criteria of becoming judges, of becoming senior lawyers, because they don't have that sort of experience that men do. That's also one problem.
Yep. Quick comment to what he said. Not all is gloom and doom. I'm very excited about the fact that the female colleagues that I have, the youngsters that work in the organization that I belong to, they stand up for their rights, they fight it out, tooth and nail. So that's the most encouraging part that's happening in our society. It delights me to no end that the women workforce realize that they will have to stand up for their rights and get it. And they are getting it. Trust me for it, they are getting it. But yes, across the board, across the economy, across the whole country, length and breadth,
But
it
they've
will
had to
take some
fight for
time.
it, Sirajuddin sir. So that's why I'm highlighting this.
Gee, they have to raise their voice. Absolutely
because
right.
they've had to fight more than men. Men take it for granted, women don't. And so Asma, why does this brings us to the next very important question. Why does the gender pay gap matter?
It matters. And if I could just answer Mr. Siraj. I mean, you say that the younger generation of females are fighting for their rights and, the right to earn the same as a man doing the same job. The women that I train, for example, they lack confidence in that. They lack belief in themselves. They lack belief in themselves. So, number one is to make them start to believe in themselves, that they do exist equally as men, Like when I get men coming to me to apply for a job, they're so much more confident in negotiating their salary, for example, or whatever I can offer them. Whereas the women are more docile and they will accept anything I say, that, you know, this is what you're going to get. They won't question me. And that's where it needs to start. We need to start instilling that sense of power in women, that you have a right to demand more. You should not hold back.
That's why even after 17 years, I still can't negotiate
Yeah,
when it comes to my salary.
it doesn't come
And I'm
naturally to
always,
us.
always thinking, no, I'm not worth this much.
Yes,
so
exactly.
you're always second guessing yourself.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Yeah, yeah.
So this happens.
I had a
all the
male
time.
partner for one of my businesses, and I would take a lower salary, I would do more work, and he would just saunter in, take a higher salary, and do nothing, basically, except for just come and disturb the peace around the place. And I've had to learn to stand up, that no, I do need to you know, start talking and start believing in myself, and I need to demand more. But that does come with age and experience.
Can I add one more thought? I think we also have to recognize, in Pakistan in particular, the wider economic reality that we are a employer's market, right? We've got more people and less good jobs. Apart from the tech industry, which is finally an employee's market, so you've got amazing jobs, you still can't find people. Majority of us are working in industries where you've got plenty of talent, good or bad, I'm not arguing, but you don't have enough well-paying jobs. And so to your point, if people are looking for jobs, and a lot of us need that job to put food on the table, a lot of this discussion we're having does not really matter. I'm sorry I'm being blunt, but that's what I've seen. And also it doesn't help, and I am going to be blunt here, but our family-owned businesses here, the practices, I can't take names, I know that they're like, just hire the person, I don't want any HR practices. The HR heads have told me, the CEOs have told them, I only want you to go and hire at the whatever rate you can. There is no structure in place. So a lot of what we're discussing, and I'm sorry again I'm being blunt here, but it doesn't matter, you know. So our economy has to do well. So if you look at markets that are doing well, look at what's happening in US, look at Singapore, you look at some of the other markets, where the job market is good, you have a voice, right? And not only in tech, but other jobs as well, where you get confidence because you have different people approaching you. There are plenty of jobs, good jobs, well-paying jobs, and because employers know that there is less talent out there, they're also forced to increase the pay. So again, just a comment.
Yeah, so, I mean, the question is, how long is this going to take? You know, it's all very well discussing this, but how long is it actually going to take to shorten this gap, to minimize it?
Can I take that and answer? I'll give you a scenario that existed in Pakistan about 15, 20 years back. If you just pick up the balance sheets of banks and financial institutions, which were family-owned and family-operated banks, you would have the board of directors, which will constitute one single family, and all the females of the family who knew nothing A to the B of banking would be part of the board. So you can understand what kind of policy making that board would be making. You pick up the balance sheet today of any bank in Pakistan, you would be very pleasantly surprised to find that the family-operated banks, even family-owned banks, will not have more than 20% on the board, their representation. The rest is all independent directors, including female directors who are professionals. So things have happened. I'm talking of the last 20-year span that I have been in Pakistan. I've seen that transition happen, and it's a very healthy and a happy transition. So I believe in other industries, it must start to appear over a period of time. But if the question is that what needs to be done, then yes, there has to be regulations, time-bound regulations, and a very strict monitoring of it.
So we have questions from the audience now. The first question is, what kind of policies need to be at government level to decrease pay gap and improve career advancement for women? Any one of you can answer, or all three of you can. Whoever wants to go first, Sajjad.
I think, so, I guess the question is, do we have the right, so assuming we want to do the policy, do we have people making the policy with the right kind of expertise on this topic, identifying what we need to improve? Just saying we're going to decrease the pay gap is not going to lead to a decrease in pay gap, right? How are we going to do this? To his point, absolutely time-bound, very strict regulations, and more importantly, if companies do not meet those criterias, what penalty they're going to get, right? So in some of the other markets, if you have regulations, and if you don't meet them, there is actually financial penalties. So I think for us to just make a policy, it's fine, and right people should be doing it, but I think we also have to balance out that if you don't meet the regulations, what kind of penalties will exist, and very stringent requirements in terms of timelines and milestones.
I take it back to a social aspect of things. One society that I saw celebrate the arrival of a male child is Philippines. Literally, mourning starts to take place in those houses where there are female child. Sorry, did I say it the wrong way? A female child is welcome, a male child is mourned for. My apologies, that's the society. Yeah. No, sorry, the other way around. मैं ये समझता हूँ कि देखिए जो लड़का पैदा होता है किसी ख़ानदान में तो ज़िम्मेदारी होती है तरबियत की तरबियत इस तरह शुरू होती है एहतराम ख़वातीन का वो एहतराम से पॉलिसी बनेगी एहतराम आप जहन में पैदा नहीं करेंगे मर्दों के औरतों के बारे में तो फिर पॉलिसी में और रियलिटी में हमेशा फ़र्क रहेगा पॉलिसी एग्जिस्ट भी अगर करेगी तो वो इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं होगी क्योंकि माइंडसेट मेरा बहुत पुख्ता हो चुका होता है उस वक्त तक तो हमें इस तरफ भी वी नीड टू पे अटेंशन टू द societal aspects of upbringing a child to appreciate that he has a responsibility towards both genders regardless of their own personal orientation. I think that is critically important.
Asma, would you like to answer that, or should I move on to the second question? The second question, it's: do you think that specialization of skills and qualification in certain sectors needs to be improved for women? I think that's an important question.
Yes, that's very important in the work that I do. Because the hospitality industry is male-dominated. There are very few women who enter, and there's a high turnover of women working in the hospitality industry, and again, that's because they're not taken seriously enough, or they are unfortunately harassed in some way or the other. So it's very difficult for them to proceed up the corporate ladder within that sector. So the more women we train, the more likely they are to be taken seriously. And I feel that now I have a lot of companies approach me asking if I can give them female employees once I've trained them. But I always say that, you also must accept the fact that these women will have their issues. So if they need to go to court, you will have to give them a day off. If they need to take sick leave for their children, that will have to be accommodated. So a lot of businesses don't think like that. They only think of the bottom line, that is this employee maximizing their profitability for us. So, until you stop that mindset, it is a little bit difficult to employ women in the kind of sector that I'm in.
Or should
Just an observation. I think we are seeing in the last 20 years, so if you go 20 years back, we did not have a lot of jobs. We did not have the technology and support system that we do now. For example, if you look at the technology industry, you see a lot more women getting into software development, which you didn't do 20 years back, right? Same for the sales force as well. Predominantly, it has always been males. They still do, but you're seeing more and more females getting into jobs now that they did 20 years back. So I think the needle has moved a little bit, but yes, to your point, there are still some jobs where the gap, and I think what we also have to realize is that we are moving into a very skill-based, specialized-based world. I think generalization is, at least in my observation, is becoming less. Because if you look at each function, you now have jobs which did not exist before. The variety of jobs have increased quite a bit. And each job now requires a single skill set. Previously, software development was one job. Now you've got front stack, back stack, full stack, A, B, C, D, E, right? So specialized world, and so yes, we do need to do a little bit in terms of filling the gap, because generally there's a gap overall anyways.
And another question is that what kind of training needs to be provided to male colleagues to empathize and accept women availing maternity leave and returning to work after a break? I'd like the men to go first and then Asma.
I'll say Pakistan needs to first increase the maternity policy to 6 months, because we are one of the lowest ones. We've got 8 weeks, if I'm right. And I think we're one of the lowest maternity policies in the world. And I know from a corporate sector perspective, it's, even if the government says 4 months, all the CEOs are going to jump. But I think, maternity, I'm sorry, but 8 weeks is not enough time, right? So I think the first thing we have to do is to improve our maternity policy, and then how do we support the structure around it, right? As far as training is concerned, to his point, absolutely. I think most of us are too late already, right? Because we've got that unconscious bias already built in. I think we have to train the next generation, the 5, 7, 9-year-olds, and say that it's absolutely fine that they have to go on maternity. It's a completely natural process, and you have to respect it, and that you have to make sure that you have to support them whenever that happens.
Since it's directed at us, I think the first thing that we need to do is to punish the males into reading literature. If we can manage them to read literature, I can assure you they'll be framing policies which will be gender friendly. They'll have appreciation. We've got to make a human out of a man, and for that we need literature, the support of literature.
So my master baker, who's been with me from the start, is a male. And when I first started hiring the trainees, he was like, "Ma'am, please, main nahi inke saath kaam kar sakta." And I convinced him, no, give it time, you'll be fine. And he says, nahi, ye serious hi nahi hai, kabhi aati hain, kabhi nahi aati, time pe nahi aati, ye nahi karti, baat nahi sunti, saas bahu wali problems le aati hain kaam pe. So he found that very difficult. But now he's adjusted so well to them, and he knows exactly how to nurture them and to turn them into professionals. So, I wouldn't say that he was a misogynist in any sense of that definition, but he was someone who wasn't used to working with women, and especially women who knew absolutely nothing. They were coming in completely fresh. So if a man like that, who cannot read or write, but earns an excellent salary because of his vast experience in the baking field, if he can deal with women who have no skill sets and adjust himself and turn them into professionals, I think that's highly commendable, and there's a lot of hope for other men too.
And there's another question. A lot of companies have specific women hiring quota. Should such a quota exist? The affirmative action that I was talking about earlier, which we've taken in Parliament.
I believe the quota must be implemented to begin with, to arrive at a certain level of participation. Once that is achieved, maybe you could remove the quota. But to have a discipline and to make sure that regulations are implemented, then there has to be a design formula. For example, I'm starting with the board itself. At least 1/3 of the board members should be females, 2/3 could be males. Similarly, at the senior management level, if there are 10 positions available of being the vice chairman or the vice CEO of an organization, then at least 50% of that should be allocated to women, and it should be compulsorily implemented.
Is there a difference between wage differential and wage discrimination? Can somebody explain this question?
I'll take a shot. I assume wage differential, definition of wage differential is around the differences in salary, and it could be linked to jobs. Wage discrimination is like basically what we're talking about, which is the gender pay gap that exists. And so I think, yes, there is a difference. Differential is probably easier to manage because different jobs have different market pricing, right? So that differential is going to exist. In Pakistan, for example, IT gets paid more right now, right? So that's the differential. But discrimination is basically the gender pay gap or pay gap that exists because of other reasons, religious, ethnic minority, A, B, C, D, E. So yeah, there is a difference.
I believe the differentials also exist in the fact that what is the gap between the man who is paid the highest in the organization and what is the lowest salary receiving. That has to be also, taken care of in terms of narrowing that gulf. Because there is already a protest taking place in the Western corporate sector where the CEOs are being harassed by media that you're taking X amount of bonuses while your staff is not getting that. So it has to be compressed also. That differential also has to be narrowed in the context of Pakistan as well.
There's another question that which sectors are more male dominated and need to focus on more gender equal intake? The media, I'd go first and say the media industry needs more women. I mean, you see a lot of women on TV and you think that there are many women in the media, but no. There are less than 10% women in the workforce because this they measured actually through press club memberships. And there are only less than 10% women in the media in Pakistan. So you can guess how male dominated it is. Just because you see more women on TV doesn't mean that there are more women in the media as such. So others, if you can talk about your industry. Hospitality, Asma has already said that it's male dominated.
Yes,
Judiciary, a lawyer, legal fraternity, I'd say.
I think most industries, perhaps there might be less bias in the healthcare, childcare industry, education. You see a lot of women take jobs in education, especially because it suits their timing with their family demands. But my industry, yes, there's definitely a bias, and I'm addressing that as much as we can. And I think in Lahore now especially you'll see more women enter that industry and you'll see more women publicly serving customers, which perhaps before was not very common at all. And I think there's been a change in the number of families who can see now that the reliance on their sons has been a little bit I think restrictive in terms of their earning potential. So a lot more families are now investing in their daughters. And especially in the hospitality industry, I've seen that if your father was a cook, a chef, you're more likely to encourage your daughter to also come into that field.
So it's time to conclude. I've just given those instructions. Thank you so much, Asma, Sirajuddin, Sajjad. It was a great discussion. Honestly, this subject is very close to my heart because for the last 17 years, I've been facing this in my own industry as well, and we've seen how women are usually overlooked when it comes to promotions, when it comes to increasing their salaries, or they actually have to fight more for the same position that would be given to men, that men take for granted. And I've also seen, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a woman, but I've also seen that when women cover certain stories, the angle changes, there's more human angle to it as well. This is something that, a lot of us don't understand. When stories about sexual harassment or rape or other issues are being covered by women, it's very different from when male anchors, or I'm not just talking about everybody, but some male anchors do not know how to cover those issues with empathy, or they cannot understand when a woman is talking about her own experience and she's saying that, I don't feel safe. They'll say, oh, she's generalizing. That's also something that the men say because they don't have the experience, same experience that we share. So this is something that we have to overcome, and it will take time. Yes, of course, we are getting better, but we're still the second worst country when it comes to gender parity. That's the problem, and that's also the harsh truth. But a lot of things will have to change in our society, in how we bring up our sons. I mean, I come from a very matriarchal society. family, a matriarchal family. So that's why I'm a bit different from on how I deal with issues. But we have a lot of problems. But thank you very much for a wonderful discussion, and thank you Weekend House and SOT for giving us this opportunity. And thank you to the audience. Thank you.